Hello, my dear friends. There is a pressure moving across the world right now that many people can feel, but very few can fully explain. It is not always visible on the surface. It does not always arrive with a single event, a single headline, or a single dramatic moment. For many, it shows up as a heaviness in the chest, a restlessness in the mind, a deep fatigue in the body, or a strange awareness that the world no longer feels the same as it once did. Something has changed. And perhaps even more importantly, something is still changing. Many souls have been asking the same quiet question. Why does everything feel so intense right now? Why does the emotional atmosphere feel heavier? Why do old fears seem to return in waves, even after so much inner work? Why do so many people feel stretched between awakening and exhaustion, between clarity and confusion, between hope and deep uncertainty? According to this spiritual perspective, what humanity is moving through is not random. It is not simply a season of collective stress. It is not only chaos, and it is not only difficulty. There is a deeper process unfolding beneath the surface of daily life. This global pressure is doing something. It is not merely pressing down on humanity. It is awakening something within humanity. And that is where the message begins. Many people assume that awakening always arrives in beautiful forms. They imagine it as peace, light, inspiration, mystical signs, and the joyful recognition that something sacred is unfolding. Sometimes it does come that way. Sometimes awakening begins with wonder. Sometimes it begins with relief. Sometimes it begins with a profound remembering that life is more than routine, more than survival, and more than the roles the world has assigned. But awakening does not always continue in gentle ways. There comes a stage in every deep transformation when the soul can no longer awaken only through comfort. There comes a point when pressure becomes part of the process. Not because the universe is cruel, not because the soul is being punished, but because certain truths cannot fully rise to the surface until the old structures are shaken. Certain forms of strength cannot emerge until easier supports begin to fall away. Certain levels of sincerity cannot be reached until illusion becomes too heavy to carry. This is what many may be sensing now. The pressure itself is becoming a revealer. It is revealing what in humanity was genuine and what was only performance. It is revealing what in people was rooted and what was only temporary excitement. It is revealing how much of spiritual language was deeply embodied and how much was merely admired from a distance. It is revealing where people are inwardly free and where they are still easily ruled by fear, approval, panic, and external narratives. That is why this time feels so intense. Pressure reveals. Pressure exposes. Pressure strips away whatever cannot remain in a more conscious future. And this is not only happening at the level of society. It is happening within individuals, relationships, communities, belief systems, and inner identities. Humanity is not simply watching a shift from the outside. Humanity is being shifted from the inside. Many people have been waiting for a dramatic sign in the sky, a single public turning point, or a clear event that would confirm that the world is entering a new chapter. But often, the greatest turning points do not begin with certainty. They begin with pressure. They begin with compression. They begin with the uncomfortable stage where something old is breaking down before something clearer has fully taken form. This is why so many people feel emotionally pulled in different directions right now. One part of the soul senses that something important is happening. Another part feels tired, fragile, and overwhelmed. One part feels called to go deeper. Another part wants relief. One part wants truth. Another part wants safety. And this inner tension is not a sign that something has gone wrong. In many cases, it is the exact evidence that a real transformation is underway. Because what this global pressure is awakening in humanity is not just awareness. It is honesty. Human beings can speak about light, consciousness, compassion, and truth for years. But pressure asks a deeper question. It asks, what remains when your comfort is interrupted? What remains when the world feels unstable? What remains when your preferred story no longer explains the depth of what you are feeling? What remains when your nervous system is challenged, your expectations are shaken, and your identity no longer feels secure? That is when awakening becomes real. Not when it sounds beautiful, when it becomes honest. And honesty is one of the first things this pressure is awakening. It is awakening honesty about exhaustion, honesty about fear, honesty about dependency, honesty about where people still seek out a rescue, honesty about where some are still attached to control, honesty about the ways many have tried to bypass pain while calling it spiritual progress, honesty about how easy it is to speak about higher consciousness in peaceful moments, and how much harder it is to remain conscious when uncertainty increases. This is not a failure of awakening. This is the purification of awakening. Humanity is being shown that awakening was never meant to be a decoration. It was never meant to be an identity people wear while life is smooth. It was never meant to be a set of words repeated online while the deeper patterns beneath the surface remain untouched. Awakening was always meant to become embodiment. It was always meant to move from inspiration into integration, from emotional excitement into grounded character, from momentary insight into lived truth. That kind of awakening cannot be built on surface energy alone. It must pass through pressure. And perhaps that is why so many are being confronted with themselves right now. Not because they are broken, because they are being invited into depth. The global pressure is awakening discernment. This is another essential layer of the message. When the world becomes loud, fast, emotionally charged, and unstable, discernment becomes sacred. People who cannot tolerate uncertainty often become vulnerable to whatever voice offers the strongest certainty. People who cannot regulate fear often mistake emotional intensity for truth. People who do not know how to pause can become trapped in reaction. And in times of collective pressure, reaction spreads very quickly. So this moment is not only awakening emotion, it is awakening the urgent need for inner discernment. Discernment is not cynicism. It is not coldness. It is not spiritual superiority. It is the ability to feel deeply without immediately surrendering to every wave that passes through the field. It is the ability to notice fear without building an identity around fear. It is the ability to hear many voices, many claims, many interpretations, and still return inwardly to clarity. It is the difference between being impressionable and being conscious. And this kind of discernment is no longer optional. If humanity is to move through greater levels of pressure without collapsing into confusion, then people must learn how to protect their inner center. They must learn how to think slowly in a fast atmosphere. They must learn how to question without becoming paranoid, feel without becoming consumed, care without becoming destabilized, and remain spiritually open without losing grounded intelligence. This is part of what the pressure is awakening. It is awakening the need for spiritual maturity. For a long time, many have approached the path of awakening as though it were mainly about receiving more signs, more insights, more energies, more messages, more excitement, and more confirmation that something extraordinary is happening. But the next phase may be asking for something very different. Maybe asking for consistency, emotional regulation, humility, inner order, integrity, the willingness to remain human, gentle, and responsible even when life feels intense. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. It is not perfect calm. It is not never feeling fear. It is not pretending to be above the human experience. It is the willingness to meet the human experience with greater truth. This global pressure is also awakening the places where humanity is still divided within itself. Much of what appears as outer conflict has an inner mirror. People are divided between trust and fear, between compassion and judgment, between hope and bitterness, between inner authority and external dependency, between the desire to awaken and the desire to remain comfortable. And when outer pressure increases, these inner fractures become harder to hide. That is why people may feel more triggered lately, more reactive, more emotionally exposed, more uncertain about what they truly believe, more aware of unresolved grief, more aware of old wounds, more aware of how deeply the body holds stress, more aware of how little control they truly have over the wider movements of life. Again, this is not punishment. It is revelation. What is hidden is surfacing. What was buried is being felt. What was delayed is returning for healing. And what was performed as strength is being tested by real pressure. There is a profound difference between appearing stable and becoming stable, between sounding awake and becoming awake, between consuming spiritual content and embodying spiritual depth. The global pressure is helping reveal that difference. It is pushing many beyond the point where borrowed language can carry them. It is inviting them into a place where direct inner work becomes unavoidable. That is one of the most powerful awakenings of all, because eventually every soul must move beyond concept and into direct encounter, beyond symbolic identity and into lived courage, beyond admiring truth and into practicing truth, beyond waiting for collective change and into becoming inwardly changed. This pressure is not only awakening truth, it is awakening responsibility. Humanity is slowly being shown that external conditions alone do not determine consciousness. Two people can live in the same world, feel the same pressures, witness the same instability, and yet become very different versions of themselves. One may become more reactive, more fearful, more rigid, more dependent on blame. The other may become more grounded, more honest, more compassionate, more discerning, and more inwardly awake. That choice matters. This message does not say that the outer pressure is easy. It does not deny that the world can feel heavy. It does not dismiss the fatigue so many are carrying. It does not ask anyone to pretend that intense times are pleasant. Instead, it asks a more profound question. What is this pressure making possible in the human soul? Perhaps it is awakening resilience that comfort never required. Perhaps it is awakening sincerity that performance never needed. Perhaps it is awakening prayer that distraction kept buried. Perhaps it is awakening self-observation that speed had avoided. Perhaps it is awakening a direct relationship with truth that no outer system can provide. Perhaps it is awakening compassion, not as a beautiful idea, but as a disciplined choice under pressure. This is how great shifts often work. They expose the false center so the real center can be found. Many people are being called right now to return to what is simple and real, to breath, to presence, to the body, to reflection, to silence, to careful speech, to meaningful restraint, to attention, to inner cleanliness, to the ability to notice what they are feeding with their thoughts, their words, and their repeated emotional patterns. These practices may sound small, but in times of collective pressure, they become powerful. Because pressure does not only test people through events, it tests them through atmosphere. The emotional atmosphere of a time can shape how people think, interpret, and behave without them even realizing it. Fear moves through groups. Rage moves through groups. Despair moves through groups. Impatience moves through groups. Contagious narratives move through groups. And many people mistake the emotional field for their own deepest truth. That is why returning inward matters so much now. Not as escape, as calibration. Without inner calibration, people easily become carriers of collective distortion. They spread panic without meaning to. They amplify division without fully understanding it. They become consumed by urgency and lose their depth. They repeat stories that intensify fear because fear feels convincing when it is widespread. They begin to live in reaction rather than awareness. The pressure is awakening the urgent need to stop living automatically. It is awakening the need to ask, what am I becoming under this atmosphere? What is being strengthened in me? What is being weakened in me? What thoughts feel borrowed? What emotions feel amplified by the field? What truly reflects my deepest values? And what merely reflects the panic of the moment? These questions are profoundly important because what humanity needs in periods of collective intensity is not more unconscious reaction. It needs people who can remain present, not passive. Present. People who can feel deeply without escalating chaos. People who can speak honestly without spreading unnecessary fear. People who can hold nuance without collapsing into confusion. People who can sense pressure, acknowledge it, and still choose not to become shaped only by it. This is a quiet form of spiritual leadership, and perhaps that too is being awakened. Not leadership based on image, certainty, or dramatic declarations. Leadership based on nervous system steadiness. Leadership based on presence. Leadership based on integrity. Leadership based on not betraying your values when the outer atmosphere is unstable. Leadership based on how you treat people when you are under pressure yourself. This matters more than many realize, because the future is shaped not only by major events, but by the consciousness with which people meet those events. This global pressure is also awakening humility. There is a humility that comes when people realize they do not fully understand the time they are living through. A humility that comes when the old formulas stop working. A humility that comes when the soul can no longer hide behind easy certainties. A humility that softens the ego and opens the deeper heart. This humility is not weakness. It is wisdom beginning to take root. The ego wants to rush toward quick interpretation, quick certainty, quick control, and immediate narrative closure. But the deeper soul often moves differently. It pauses. It listens. It remains willing not to know too quickly. It allows deeper meaning to reveal itself in time. It understands that not every mystery is meant to be turned into instant conclusion. Some mysteries are meant to transform the one who lives through them. That too is part of awakening. This is why many people feel as though they are standing between worlds. The old world of distraction, speed, dependency, and inherited narratives still exists. But another way of being is trying to emerge. A way rooted in more sincerity, more discernment, more embodiment, more humility, more conscious feeling, more direct responsibility for the state of one's own soul. The pressure is making it harder to remain superficial, and that is a gift, even if it does not feel like one at first. There are people who will respond to this time by growing harder, more defensive, more rigid, more obsessed with controlling what cannot be controlled, more attached to being right, more likely to turn discomfort into blame. There are others who will respond differently. They will become quieter, but clearer, softer, but stronger, more honest, more grounded, more careful with their attention, more aware of what they consume, more respectful of stillness, more committed to inner truth than outer noise. These are the souls who are allowing pressure to awaken wisdom instead of panic. And that choice is available more often than people think. Sometimes awakening does not look like a breakthrough moment. Sometimes it looks like refusing to speak from fear. Sometimes it looks like taking one deep breath before reacting. Sometimes it looks like choosing rest instead of overstimulation. Sometimes it looks like turning away from noise and toward prayer. Sometimes it looks like admitting the truth about your exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like grieving honestly instead of pretending to be above grief. Sometimes it looks like noticing your desire for certainty and not instantly obeying it. These are not small victories. These are signs of real inner change. The pressure is awakening the places where humanity still longs for rescue. This is another difficult but important part of the message. Many people say they want freedom, truth, or awakening, but under pressure, they immediately look for someone else to hand them emotional safety, certainty, answers, identity, or direction. This does not mean community is wrong. It does not mean guidance is wrong. But it does mean that the soul must eventually stop outsourcing its deepest center. No outer figure can permanently do your inner grounding for you. No message can replace your own responsibility to practice presence. No prophecy can do your discernment for you. No powerful symbol can substitute for real integration. This is what pressure often reveals. Where people still hope to be carried by something they themselves must become willing to develop. And yet the tone of this message is not condemnation. It is invitation. Humanity is being invited into greater depth, not into perfection, into depth, into emotional honesty, into spiritual sobriety, into conscious embodiment, into the kind of compassion that survives tension, into the kind of truth that does not need performance, into the kind of faith that can remain alive even when certainty is absent. That kind of faith is not built in easy seasons alone. It is built through return. Return after fear. Return after confusion. Return after emotional overwhelm. Return after reactivity. Return after distraction. Return to center. Again and again and again. Perhaps this is one of the greatest things this global pressure is awakening in humanity. The necessity of return. You do not need to be constantly elevated. You do not need to be in perfect alignment every hour. You do not need to never feel doubt, fatigue, or fear. But you do need to learn how to return. How to notice when you have drifted into panic. How to notice when your mind is feeding on noise. How to notice when your body is overloaded. How to notice when your compassion is shrinking. How to notice when you are reacting from old wounds rather than present clarity. And then, gently, consciously return. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Return to truth. Return to humility. Return to what makes you less easy to manipulate. Return to what makes you more capable of love. This is not glamorous, but it is powerful. In fact, it may be far more powerful than dramatic declarations because it creates actual stability. It helps form human beings who are not merely inspired for a moment, but who become inwardly reliable. And the world needs inwardly reliable people right now. People whose values do not disappear under stress. People whose nervous systems do not decide every truth for them. People who can remain kind without becoming naive and discerning without becoming cold. This pressure is awakening compassion in a more mature form. Not compassion as sentiment, compassion as strength. Compassion as the refusal to dehumanize others even when the atmosphere encourages division. Compassion has the willingness to remember that many people are frightened, overloaded, and spiritually disoriented. Compassion as the understanding that everyone is being shown something right now, even if they do not have language for it. Compassion as the courage to stay human in inhuman times. This matters immensely, because when pressure rises, one of the quickest things to disappear is tenderness. People begin speaking to each other with less patience. They become more brittle, more suspicious, more quick to reduce others to categories, narratives, and enemies. But the loss of tenderness is not a sign of wisdom. It is often a sign of overwhelm. So perhaps this time is also asking humanity to protect tenderness, not weakness. Tenderness. The kind that keeps the soul from becoming hard. the kind that keeps truth from becoming cruel, the kind that keeps discernment from becoming superiority, the kind that remembers that awakening without love becomes another form of distortion. The global pressure is awakening the difference between information and transformation. Humanity has access to endless streams of content, messages, ideas, interpretations, and emotional stimulation. But information alone does not transform. In many cases, it only intensifies the mind. Transformation asks something else. It asks embodiment, practice, reflection, digestion, stillness, repetition, integrity, honest relationship with the self. In this sense, the pressure may be interrupting endless consumption and asking a deeper question. What have you actually become through everything you have learned? That question cuts to the core. Not what have you collected. What have you become? Have you become more grounded, more compassionate, more self-aware, more difficult to manipulate, more honest under stress, more capable of holding paradox without collapse, more able to stay conscious in an unconscious atmosphere? If the answer is yes, even in small ways, then something real is growing. And if the answer is not yet, then the pressure itself may be the invitation that helps awaken it. This message is not telling humanity to fear the pressure. It is telling humanity to understand the pressure, to recognize that intense times do not only threaten the soul, they also reveal the soul. They expose what was hidden. They clarify what matters. They force a confrontation with false centers. They awaken buried capacities. They strip away distractions that once looked convincing. They call people into seriousness, not panic, into responsibility, not despair, into conscious participation, not passive drift. This is why the pressure can feel so holy and so uncomfortable at the same time. Because it is not only squeezing humanity, it is shaping humanity. And while much of the outer world may still appear confused, unstable, or divided, something else may be quietly happening beneath the surface. A more mature kind of awakening may be forming. Less dramatic, less performative, less obsessed with looking spiritual, more sincere, more grounded, more embodied, more capable of carrying light without needing constant reassurance. That kind of awakening is not trendy, it is durable. And perhaps that is exactly what this time is trying to grow. So if you have felt the heaviness, if you have felt the pressure, if you have felt strangely stretched between knowing and not knowing, between fatigue and clarity, between emotional intensity and deep inner calling, do not assume that you are simply falling backward. You may be in the middle of being refined. You may be learning what cannot be learned through comfort alone. You may be discovering the difference between spiritual stimulation and spiritual depth. You may be standing at the place where awakening stops being a concept and begins becoming character. And if that is true, then this moment is not meaningless. It is formative. Let the pressure show you where you need more grounding. Let it show you where you need more honesty. Let it show you what steals your center. Let it show you which voices increase fear without increasing wisdom. Let it show you which habits make you more vulnerable to confusion. Let it show you where your compassion becomes conditional. Let it show you where you still long to be rescued from the work only your soul can do. And then do not hate yourself for what is revealed. Work with it. Breathe with it. Pray with it. Be truthful with it. Because awakening is not the absence of pressure. It is the transformation of how you meet pressure. That may be the deepest message here. The global pressure is not only testing humanity, it is awakening humanity, awakening honesty, awakening discernment, awakening humility, awakening responsibility, awakening tenderness, awakening the need for return. awakening the kind of faith that can survive uncertainty, awakening the difference between borrowed truth and embodied truth, awakening the soul's deeper center beneath the noise. So do not rush to interpret every heavy season as failure. Sometimes the most sacred growth happens when the old self no longer feels sustainable and the new self has not yet fully formed. Sometimes the soul is not lost. It is in transition. Sometimes the world is not only falling apart. Something within humanity is being asked to come together at a higher level of sincerity. Stand gently in that possibility. Protect your center. Guard your attention. Practice inner cleanliness. Do not give every passing emotion authority over your identity. Do not let noise become your compass. Do not let urgency become your master. Do not let pressure convince you that you have no power. You still have power. The power to pause. The power to observe. The power to choose your next thought carefully. The power to withhold fear from spreading further. The power to speak with truth and compassion together. The power to return to what is real when illusion becomes loud. And perhaps that is the awakening beneath all awakenings. Not merely seeing that the world is changing, but becoming the kind of soul that can remain true while it changes. That is what this global pressure may be awakening in humanity. Not just awareness, depth, not just intensity, discernment, not just spiritual language, embodiment, not just fear of collapse, the courage to become real. And maybe that is why so many feel this so strongly now. Because somewhere beneath the noise, the soul recognizes what the mind still struggles to explain. This pressure has purpose. This tension has meaning. This season is revealing. And the people who choose truth, humility, steadiness, and compassion in the midst of it may become the very bridge that carries a more conscious humanity forward. So breathe, slow down, listen inwardly. Let what is false fall away. Let what is real strengthen. And remember, the pressure may be global, but the awakening is deeply personal. And what is awakened in each soul now may matter more than anyone yet fully understands.